Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Big news coming out of Athens on Saturday. Carson Beck has been named Georgia starting quarterback, and as you would imagine, we are all over that today. We'll talk about what this means for Beck. I think there are really two important takeaways. We'll get to those here in a moment. We'll also talk about what this means for the other quarterbacks on the Georgia roster, and that in itself is a significant conversation. We'll hear from John Stinchcomb on this. We'll cover some of the other position battles also taking place at UGA right now. Some of this we'll admittedly have to say for tomorrow, but we're going to cover some non-quarterback related topics here today, but a lot on quarterbacks, including Kirby Smart really making himself very clear about his current feelings on this situation. So we'll begin there and kind of stay there for most of the day, but plenty more fun and perhaps a surprise or two mixed in between. Glad to have you with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I'm sure if you made a list over the years of all the opinions and hot takes we've had, I'm sure we've gotten plenty of things wrong. In fact, I know we have. But every now and then we do get something right, and I believe this is an example of that. Over the course of the last couple of weeks, as Georgia has been starting its fall camp and kind of getting into preparation for the upcoming season, when it comes to quarterback position, the one thing we said was expect Kirby Smart to be pretty candid about what's happening here. That if there was news to report about one of these quarterbacks, either Carson Beck extending his perceived lead in the race to become the next starting quarterback, Kirby Smart would probably say so. And if something were to happen to kind of close the gap there, we said that Kirby Smart would probably say that as well. And if there wasn't anything being said of any kind of real substance about Beck or their quarterbacks, then Georgia fans should probably take that as an example of no news, not being good news, because in the past, when it's been kind of quiet on the QB front, that has generally suggested that maybe things weren't going to be quite so great on the field. We've got an example of that. Well, as it turns out, it kind of played out exactly as we said that it would, that if there was a clear announcement to be made, that Kirby Smart likely would not have a problem making it. You've heard us say that before. And on Saturday, when asked about, Carson Beck, the Georgia quarterback situation, Kirby Smart made his current feelings on this quarterback situation unmistakably clear. This is what Kirby Smart said.
Carson Beck is going to be our starting quarterback. He's done the best job. We've communicated that earlier in the week to the other quarterbacks, and we've kind of been operating that way. And the other guys have done a tremendous job in terms of competing, and they're going to continue to do that. We haven't said anything in terms of who the second quarterback is or how those reps are going to be divvied up. But Carson is ahead of the other guys in terms of what he understands about the offense.
So my understanding is going into that second scrimmage, and this is obviously, rumor mill, you talk to somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, is that Carson Beck was going to get all of the number one reps during that scrimmage. Georgia now kind of feeling that it's time to prepare a quarterback for the upcoming season. Not necessarily Tennessee Martin, but just whatever kind of comes after that. That doesn't mean something couldn't happen, couldn't change. Obviously, injuries are a factor here too, potentially. But for now, it is Carson Beck as the guy that Georgia wants to build around, and that's what this was seemingly leading to. At one point in time, it felt like there had been a little bit of a mood shift with the idea that maybe something could happen slightly different than we saw at the end of spring. But ultimately, Beck is able to kind of hold on, if nothing else, build on the advantage that he has seemingly had. And I think there are kind of two things going on here, two reasons why Kirby Smart made the announcement that he made on Saturday, saying it clearly, unmistakably, Carson Beck is our starting quarterback. One of these things, I'm going to lean pretty heavily on another former Georgia starting quarterback who joins us each week for kind of an idea on this. When I told Jake Fromm a couple of weeks ago my belief that I was expecting some candor from Kirby on the quarterback position, Jake Fromm told us at the time that he agreed with me on that and went on to kind of call upon his own experience as a Georgia quarterback in terms of how Kirby sometimes talks about these things. So when you want to kind of know, well, why is it that Kirby's naming Beck now? What's going on here? Something that Jake Fromm told us 2 weeks ago, I think serves as one of the explanations. That part of this could just simply be a way of Kirby Smart wanting to see how Beck handles the good news, how he handles the, degree of praise that comes along with now being named as the starting quarterback. What will his response to all of that be? This is what Jake Fromm said about that as an idea, Kirby being candid and seeing how players react to it on our show just a couple of weeks ago. Here's Jake Fromm.
For the most part, in my opinion, I think Kirby, for a lot of things, is an open book. Will call things as he sees it, even to the media space as well. And then also, too, sometimes he will throw things out there in the media to see how his players react to hearing what he said, if that makes sense. Hey, if someone's getting praised, hey, how is he going to handle that? Because that would be an indicator of how he would handle it throughout the season after a good game or something. How is he going to handle it and go and respond the next week and play and prepare for the next week's game?
That's the kind of uncommon insight you may have to have had been a Georgia starting quarterback to kind of fully be able to possess and be able to explain there in that situation. That Carson Beck has now heard the announcement. This is something he thought he might get back in 2021 when JT Daniels was dealing with one of his injuries. Didn't happen then, but it's now going to happen for him here in August of 2023 ahead of the upcoming season. He's going to be named the starting quarterback. He has been hungry. He's been fighting for it, and now he's gotten it. Well, will he stay as hungry? That's what Jake Fromm says, or at least he asked the question out loud. Will he stay as hungry? Will he stay as driven to succeed? Is there any kind of change in him in all of this? Jake Fromm says perhaps that's maybe one of the reasons that Kirby Smart says what he said on Saturday. And with that as an idea, Kirby Smart reported this past weekend that so far so good in terms of how Carson Beck has handled all of this, that if some of this is about let's see how he responds, apparently according to Kirby, the response from Carson Beck about now knowing he's going to be the starting quarterback has been pretty positive thus far. Kirby once again.
Hasn't changed much. I think he understood. He got a pretty good volume of those reps anyway. He's done well prior to knowing that, and he's done well post knowing that. And to be honest, both Gunner and Brock have too. They've done a tremendous job of growing and continuing to put the offense in positions to be successful and make explosive plays. So they've all done a good job of that.
So Kirby Smart says Carson Beck's going to be our starting quarterback. Jake Fromm told us a couple of weeks ago, sometimes when Kirby is that clear, when he's that candid, it can be a way of saying, how does the player respond to hearing that? And Kirby Smart then says, so far so good in terms of how Carson Beck's handling all of this, that it hasn't really changed, that he's remained as driven, as focused, as determined and dedicated as he's been throughout this entire process. So that seems like really good news. But I want to make something really clear here for a moment, that the decision to name Carson Beck on Saturday goes far beyond just being some sort of psyop, some sort of like psychological thing of, ooh, I want to say this. I'm going to play mental games with my quarterbacks. I'm going to see how he responds to it. I'm going to see how the other guys respond to it. There's a lot more going on here than the psychological part of this of using my words to the media, some sort of motivation or something like that. That you don't have to, in this particular case, read between the lines on Kirby Smart. We told you the other day that if he could be candid, if he could be straightforward, he would be. And if Kirby didn't feel like he could be straightforward or candid, then maybe George was in a little bit of a tough situation in terms of finding the appropriate replacement at quarterback. But the good news is that apparently Carson Beck has done so well that it was, not to say that he's been perfect or anything like that, but he's done well enough that Kirby was unbothered by stepping up and saying, yeah, this guy is going to be our starting quarterback. And I think it's appropriate to know that Kirby Smart also made it very clear why Carson Beck was the starting quarterback. In addition to the suggestion of, well, maybe you want to see how guys respond to this. Maybe you want to see what this kind of does to the overall psyche of the guys in the competition. Beck, the winner, Vandegrift and Stockton, the two guys who are on the other side of that here right now. In addition to that, Kirby Smart also made it really, really clear exactly why it's going to be Beck as the starting quarterback. And this is, I think, an important add-on to all of this. Kirby Smart again.
Carson's been in this offense, for a year over one of them and 2 years over Gunner, and he's just ahead. So he'll be our starting quarterback.
So when Kirby Smart says he's been here longer, and he also says he's just ahead, understand this. This is not the same thing as saying, well, he's waited his turn, and so therefore it's turn. This isn't Little League left field. Not everybody gets a turn, okay? What Carson Beck has used is his experience to build the advantage. And we said at the start of spring practice, you want to go back months and months and months ago, we said that the ultimate weapon in this competition was Beck's experience. But Beck was not going to get the job just because he'd been waiting the longest for it. This is still a meritocracy. This is still a competition. But in that competition, the experience that Beck has was always going to be just a really potent weapon, and it sounds like that's exactly what has been maintained throughout all of this. I'm led to believe, based on people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, that Beck just knows the offense better. And Kirby Smart says that openly and clearly right there. And that's not to say that Vandegrift and Stockton could not play well if they got a chance to be in the game. In fact, before the show is done, we're going to do a lot on Vandegrift and Stockton and their role on this team here this season, both for this year and then moving on for their future there at UGA. I promise we're going to do a lot on those guys here. But for now, it's Beck's moment to kind of be in the spotlight and have a little sunshine on him. And the deciding, differentiating factor I'm led to believe, is the fact that Carson Beck just knows the offense better. That experience is valuable, and it's the kind of thing that just was always going to make him very hard to overtake. He looked like the seasoned, experienced veteran at the end of spring practice, and apparently that lead that we all saw with our own eyes him have back in April, he still has now. And once again, if you want to go back to Jake Fromm here for a moment, and in discussions like this, we do lean on Jake just simply because Jake has been here before in all kinds of Georgia quarterback competitions. When I asked Jake on this show on Friday, before at the time Beck had been named the starter, I asked Jake, I said, hey, if you're a Brock Vandegrift, if you're a Gunnar Stockton, there's this perceived lead that Carson Beck has in this competition. What can one of those guys do to close that gap? And Jake admitted at the time that it's just not an easy thing to do when a guy moves into summer seemingly ahead in the quarterback competition. This is what Jake said about that topic on Friday.
Yeah, really tough. I think what you got to do is you got to just prove to them, the coaches, that you know the system, that you're trustworthy. Just go out and execute football plays. Whatever the intent of the play is on each specific play, understand what that is, execute the play, be dialed in with accuracy. And then, too, man, I think from a guy like Brock and Gunnar, too, who are able to use their legs a little bit, I think they're going to have to get in a game situation and really just go out and play ball. Use their legs, extend plays, extend drives with their legs on third down, so to speak.
So the last part of that of, hey, you put a Vandegrift in the game, you put a Gunnar Stockton in the game, they've got this extra dimension. That becomes a tough thing for opposing defense to go up against. They may do something with their legs, and clearly that mobility, that ability to run gives them some value. So in a game situation, you may see some things with from Vandegrift or Stockton that you really like, and that could be fun for Georgia fans later on this year. But long-term, the overwhelming takeaway from what Jake Fromm said there is the advantage that Beck had coming into the month of August was going to be very hard to overtake because he just knows the offense better, in part because he's just been here longer. So if you're Brock Vandegrift and you want to be the next starting quarterback at Georgia, take this time to learn the offense as well as Carson Beck apparently does. If you're Gunnar Stockton, who believes that he can be the future of Georgia in this quarterback position, take this time, build on this with some experience to learn the offense as well as Carson Beck does. That was the thing that he had going for him. It's not just his turn to be quarterback, but the experience that he's gained over the course of the last few years has made him the best quarterback option for Georgia right now. Carson Beck deserves credit for making good on this potential and earning this job for himself. It is quite a moment for him, and we're certainly proud for him. As far as what's next for Vandegrift and Stockton, before the show is done, we're going to talk plenty about that as well. But first, we need to take some time to introduce the show. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast, Georgia Bulldogs fans. Presented today, Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Every platform in the seemingly imaginable is available to you to watch the show. 9:45 on our website, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. All video platforms after that, on the radio every day, podcast, whichever podcast platform you prefer there as well. We want to make the show as available as we possibly can for you, and we appreciate you being a part of it, and we appreciate our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for being a part of it there as well. Energy efficient windows and doors. That is what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is all about. And listen, it's one of those things that when you take good care of your home, by putting the Pella doors in, by putting the Pella windows in. What you were doing, I think, is taking a step that could really benefit you when it's time to kind of do the resale thing. When you're thinking about doing that at some point in time, and maybe that's years away for you, but taking the best care of your home, and when you're getting ready to sell that house, showing that invoice, whatever, and saying, hey, look, here's what I put on this house. I put Pella windows. I put Pella doors. Eye-opening response from the person getting ready to buy that house, because they know you're the kind of homeowner that takes the best possible care of the home that you've had. And obviously you want to be able to enjoy that for yourself. Feeling good on the inside, that's what Pella windows and doors are all about. So if you've been hearing me say this now for years, it's probably time for you to have one of those no-pressure consultations with one of the Pella experts. They're just going to simply walk you through all of this. The product line, the installation options, if necessary, the financing options. It's not a pressure thing. You can do it in person in your home. You can go see them in their experience center in their Duluth, which is kind of a cool place to be because you can kind of put your hands on all of this. You can do it over the phone. Either way, you can just have that conversation and find out why it is that in survey after survey, year after year, homeowners right here in our area say that, yeah, you know what? Pella window and door really is viewed to be the best. Not just a slogan, but an actual representation of their position in the marketplace. No one stands equal to them, unrivaled in every possible area. So do this. Give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. You can also find them online, PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaofGA.com/DawgNation. And when you talk to them, I want you to do a couple of things. First of all, I want you to tell them that BA from DawgNation Daily sent you over there, because I truly believe they're going to do great stuff for you. And I also want you to find out about a great savings opportunity they have right now for you as well, because between now and September 30th, you can get 10% off your entire project, or no payments, no interest for 12 months. Once again, give them a call, 678-638-1429, or PellaofGA.com/DawgNation for more on that. So as I told you before, we are going to do more on quarterbacks before we're done. So please stick with me at the very end here today. We're going to kind of get into more of what's next for Vandegrift, what's next for Stockton. And by the way, how does Dylan Raiola, who made his Georgia debut on Friday, how does Dylan Raiola factor into all of this? We'll get into that before our show is done today. We'll also touch on another important position battle here in a moment, and we'll hear from John Stinchcomb. But prior to that, let me remind you that we've got a big event coming up with DawgNation just 2 Thursdays from now. That's less than 2 weeks away. Really excited about DawgNation Happy Hour. That's our brand new show, DawgNation Happy Hour. We're going to be live at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven doing a live broadcast on Thursday, August 31st. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of hang out and have a little bit of a happy hour together. At 5, obviously, it's called DawgNation Happy Hour. Marlowe's your home for happy hour here in the Atlanta area. So at 5 p.m., we're going to do a happy hour get-together with all of you who are able to come out and see us at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven. Then at 6 p.m., that's a special time, but at 6 p.m., we're going to have a live broadcast of our DawgNation Happy Hour. Kaylee Mansell going to be there. A host of folks from DawgNation are going to be there. I'm obviously planning on being there. Going to be a wonderful, wonderful time. We want you to be a part of it. Live broadcast. We've kind of done something similar to this a good number of years to kind of kick off the season. And we're going to be next Thursday. That's 2 Thursdays from now. Marlowe's in Brookhaven, 5 p.m. for a happy hour and taking advantage of all the great fun happy hour things that Marlowe's has going on. And then 6 p.m. for the live broadcast of our newest show, the DawgNation Happy Hour, presented by Marlowe's Tavern at Marlowe's Tavern. There in Brookhaven. That is going to be a terrific time. All right, so before we get back into quarterbacks and before we hear from John Stinchcomb, I also want to take some time to go around the DawgHouse here today, and I want to talk about something else other than quarterback just for a minute. I want to give you some context why this matters. There are not very many things over the course of this offseason in terms of a football on-the-field thing that Kirby Smart has said, we want to get better at this. But there is one. When Kirby Smart was, at SEC Media Days back in July, because keep in mind here, Georgia's the 2-time national champion. Georgia, we had Pro Football Focus the other day. Listen, they're best, just getting better, top position group across the board, seemingly anyway. So much success, individual player success, overall team success. There's just not a lot of blemishes on the Georgia resume over the course of the last couple of years. But I'm going to play a short clip here for you more. It's only a couple of seconds long. But at SEC Media Days, when Kirby Smart was saying, where can you get better? Kirby Smart made it very clear there is one specific area on the field he wants to see improvement from his team regarding, and this is what Kirby Smart said about that back in July.
You want to know what we can do better or what I can do better? Well, there's a lot of things we can do better. We can play much better pass defense late in the season.
So Kirby Smart says, hey, listen, this is a specific on-the-field thing. We need to, in the biggest games we play, the ones that come at the end of the year, we need to play better pass defense. They got, let's just be honest here, Garrett Nussmeier, the backup LSU quarterback, kind of torched them in the second half of the SEC championship. Ultimately, that probably doesn't mean a ton because it's garbage time. Georgia had a big lead, probably already thinking about the college football playoff, but nonetheless, it did happen. It was much more significant when C.J. Stroud did that for Ohio State. Stroud had the game of his life. Honestly, Stroud made millions probably on his performance there against Georgia, was taken in the draft, I think, much higher than he probably otherwise would have been because of what folks saw him do against Georgia that day. That's another day in which the Georgia pass defense was certainly not perfect, and in Kirby Smart's mind, it needs to get a little bit better. So all of that is context for the next thing here. Well, one of the ways in which that question gets answered is how some of these position battles are resolved here. We now know seemingly who Georgia's two starting safeties are going to be. Malachi Starks had a good freshman season last year. He is established. Javon Bullard's one of the best players in the entire country. He slides over from nickelback, what Georgia calls a star, to play another safety spot. Those two guys are established. Now I dare say they almost never will come off the field, assuming one of them doesn't get hurt. Georgia doesn't rotate at safety just nearly as much. Starks and Bullard will be on the field. They will be the safeties. The star position that Bullard occupied a year ago, seems like Tyke Smith is probably first in line there on that. Janelle Aguero, if he's fully healthy, is going to be a competitor for playing time there too. But Aguero is also dealing, and we'll have more on this kind of as the week goes on, he's kind of dealing with his own injury situation there right now. So we don't quite yet know how big of a factor he's going to be in all of this, but that's kind of the situation. Aguero battling Tyke Smith. Safeties firmly established. Kamari Laster, one of the top players returning in the SEC at the other cornerback position. But then you've got the spot that Keely Ringo occupied opposite Laster. And for now, it sort of sounds like that thing is wide open. So it's kind of interesting to watch this position battle play out. But the context here of it being a part of a position group that Kirby Smart has directly pointed to and says, I want this group to be way better, all of a sudden the way this plays out over the course of the next couple of weeks kind of starts to really matter here. Kirby Smart on that cornerback competition. This is after Georgia's second scrimmage on Saturday. Here's Kirby once again.
All those guys are competing. You got Dalen, Julio, and Nyland all rolling and playing primarily with the ones. AJ's gotten a few reps with the ones. So those four guys will continue to battle it out. There's no reason to make a decision because we've got competitive practices Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, all the next week. And if nobody's a clear-cut guy, then we'll play multiple guys until we figure it out. But we're waiting for somebody to step up and take it, and that hasn't happened.
We are waiting for someone to step up and take it, and that hasn't happened yet. Now, I would say there are probably a couple of reasons that's true. It sounds like at one point in time, I think most of us who kind of do the, hey, let's have our expected starters list or things like that, I think most of us kind of had Dalen Everett sort of penciled in here as, well, that's going to be the guy there in that spot. I don't have any reason to believe that Everett's had a bad summer or anything like that, but it sounds like a guy like Julian Humphrey, who, to be honest with you, and every now and then this happens, big-time recruit comes in, and it's just like deathly silent about this guy for a long time. And I would say that for a little while last year, if you're ear to the ground on the rumor mill, you weren't hearing nothing about Humphrey for a while. And a little concerning, sometimes it's sort of interesting, the dog that isn't barking, and for a while, the dogs around Humphrey weren't really barking at all. Well, that's not really true anymore. It sounds like Julian Humphrey, or as they call him, Julio, sounds like he has had a pretty good summer, and it sounds like he's a real factor in all of this. Nyland Green's been here. We've seen Green make good plays on special teams. That kind of gives you an idea of the kind of moxie he brings to all of this. So some of this may be, well, it's unsettled because a lot of guys are making a name for themselves. It could also be, more, I guess, negative assessment possibly too, but at least consider the idea that this may be happening in part because of the fact that a lot of guys are competing. But let me give you one more thing here, and this is just, put a pin in this and file it away and come back to it later on. The name that Kirby Smart mentions at the end there, A.J. Harris. And I'll tell you this, some of our commenters have been saying this here for a little while, and I don't know that I probably gave them as much credit as I probably should have. Sometimes when you're the host, you kind of fall in love with your own opinions, and you perhaps, it's at least possible that you don't fully consider the opinions of others as well as you possibly could. But the point here is, we've had some folks saying, hey, watch out for A.J. Harris, watch out for A.J. Harris. Here's what I'll tell you. The longer this goes on, being unsettled, the more guys who've been here are not necessarily asserting themselves as the likely starter. the more the door is open for a guy like A.J. Harris. Now, I'm not predicting, well, A.J. Harris can end up being Georgia's starting cornerback. At least not right now. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying, what's the line? Is it Littlefinger from, is that his name, from Game of Thrones, Chaos is a Ladder? In a position competition like this, chaos can also be a little bit of a ladder too, in that if it's Everett, it's Humphrey, and it's Nyland Green, they're all battling it out. Well, the longer that goes unsettled, the more a very talented, former highly rated recruit like A.J. Harris, a guy like that just sort of hangs around, has a chance to make a name for himself. The more this goes unsettled, the longer that lasts, the more A.J. Harris' opportunity could kind of go up. So it's just kind of fun to consider. Probably doesn't need to be settled for a few weeks, but as it does, just sort of keep that in mind. Kirby mentioning A.J. by name there, big-time prospect. A lot of Georgia fans in our comment sections have been like, hey, watch out for him. They may have turned out to be right on that, or at least they have the chance to before the season's done, so maybe worth considering. We'll make that around the DawgHouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. So I told you, before we are done, we're going to do a bunch more on quarterback. Because honestly, the stuff involving Vandegrift and Stockton may be as interesting as the stuff involving Carson Beck. It's Beck's day. He's the starter. I wanted him to kind of have the opening segment to himself just because I think he deserves that. It's quite a moment in that young man's life to step up and be the starting quarterback. But the Stockton-Vandegrift stuff is really interesting. And I think it gets even more interesting once you kind of bring next year's incoming freshman Dylan Raiola into all that mix there as well. So I promise you, we are heavy on the other quarterbacks, both now and future Georgia quarterbacks, before we're done on the program. But for now, let me bring in someone else's opinion and hear what he has to say. A lot of fun stuff going on around Georgia here right now as the season gets ready to take place. Let's find out more about all of it. We'll do an insider update with John Stinchcomb, presented by Marlowe's Tavern.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let me say hello to John Stinchcomb. We're so happy to have him here as part of a Marlowe's Tavern insider update. So, John, pretty big news to react to here, and it's kind of funny. It's like we've been doing this obviously the last few weeks. Now I do this every day, and I don't have any problem speculating on whatever. I'll just throw stuff out there, and we'll just see where it all lands. I've got no problem doing that. I've done that for a living for a long time. However, you are a lot more measured. You're a lot more, careful with your words sometimes than I perhaps might be. And so last few weeks, our conversations have all been about, well, maybe this will happen. Perhaps that might happen. It's a lot of conjecture, I guess, if you will. Today, that's not the case. You were kind of in a season posture when you've got actual substantial news to react to. We got some from Kirby on Saturday, stepped up, looked right into the cameras, right into the microphone, and said, Carson Beck is going to be our starting quarterback. What's your reaction to that announcement from Kirby on Saturday?
Well, I think it's first and foremost that Carson has separated himself and he's earned this opportunity. It's based on performance. It's based on his body of work since basically Stetson has left, and arguably before then, that he has created enough separation. There's enough gap in performance not to say that the other quarterbacks haven't performed well. They just haven't performed as well. And it's reached a point where it's worth recognizing. But it's probably something the team, the guys, the coaches, the players, they've seen for a long time, that they've, even if the performance of the other quarterbacks is good, there is still a gap. And recognizing that and being able for the team to say, this is our guy, and we're going to support him and rally around him, I think speaks a lot into what Carson's been able to do up to this point.
I'll tell you what my favorite thing about all of this is, and ultimately I'm fairly nonpartisan on stuff like this. I would have been happy with Beck. I think I could have been happy with Vandegrift. I like Gunnar Stockton a lot. I'm fairly nonpartisan on a lot of these position battles. As a Georgia fan, I just want Georgia to have a good one. Whatever his name is fine with me. I just want Georgia to have a good player at the position. So ultimately, I didn't really have a rooting interest necessarily, but what I do like about all of this is kind of how non-controversial it is. John, if we're just really honest here for a moment, the Georgia quarterback situation has been pretty weird now for years. That wasn't really weird a year ago. You had established starter Stetson Bennett building off a national championship legacy, went out there and did that again. But prior to that, you better believe 2021 was weird. We thought that JT Daniels might be, among the best quarterbacks in the country, and by week 2, he's not even starting, and you were left to wonder, what the health situation had been since he'd been here in 2020, what it was going to be going forward. And, you thought, well, Carson Beck might be the guy. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Stetson Bennett gets, pegged to be the dude. And obviously that really worked out. It's not a bad thing, but it was weird. You have to say that the way the quarterback thing at Georgia played out for a good number of years was weird. 2020 was probably weird for everybody, but my gosh, with Dwan Mathis and Jamie Newman and all that junk, it was especially weird for Georgia. John, this isn't weird at all. The guy who's been here the longest, used his experience to know the offense better, apparently outperformed the other two guys. And listen, anything can happen from now, but this is the least weird option possible. And apparently Beck for now is also the best option too. But I just love how non-controversial and unweird all of this is.
Couldn't agree more, and I think it's a testament. Again, it's probably, what's a great teacher? Experience, right? Coach Smart and the staff has gone through it in the past. When there wasn't clarity in that position, they allowed space for the conversation to exist. When it was JT and Jamie and Dwan, there was a constant conversation that was being held. They were asking questions or answering questions on a daily basis about the position. And until early in the season this past year, where it was very obvious who the number one was, that's not been a luxury that we have experienced. And so I think recognizing the stability that it can create, that we can move the conversation to other places, is an advantage, and probably something that's not quite as exhausting on their end, but it's predicated by performance. And you have to have a quarterback who has separated themselves and has earned that right to kind of move the conversation along. And it's not one of those situations that we've faced in the past where there wasn't the clarity. JT hadn't distinguished himself, or Jamie or Dwan, or fill in the blank, until Stetson had this past season, or in this case, Carson has so far this off season. So, experience is a great teacher, and it creates. It's caused by separation and performance that you kind of move the conversation to other places.
So the other quarterbacks, I think, remain really fascinating in all of this. We're going to talk more about this in our show here today, John, but I want to give you a chance to weigh in on this too. To me, the most interesting thing about Vandergriff and Stockton right now is the fact that Kirby Smart, I think, has made it clear that the battle to be the number 2 quarterback is still open, and I take that pretty seriously based on some of the things that I've heard. Perhaps you very much the same way, in that, A, number 2 quarterbacks in the SEC matter. They play frequently. Injuries are just a part of the game. And B, while there has been a lot to like apparently about Brock Vandergriff, I've heard that he's had a very good summer. I've heard that there are a lot of teammates that seemingly like Brock, which is kind of a cool thing. I've also heard really good things about Gunnar Stockton, too. It's never a bad thing to have a lot of good players. Sounds like Georgia may have 3 of them in the quarterback spot, but the Stockton-Vandergriff competition to now be the number 2 quarterback, John, I think that's a real thing. I think that's also about to play out, and the winner of that could have massive consequences for the future, because being number 2 a year ago is one of the big reasons that Carson Beck is now number 1.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. I think that's where the focus shifts, right? And I think there's a difference in who's number 2 in the scenario that number 1 gets hurt, and who's number 2 in the fact that their profile and what they offer the team is different than what the number 1 quarterback provides. And let me flesh that out a little bit. If Carson is known more as a pocket passer, obviously capable as a runner, but doesn't feature that as one of the main characteristics of his game, whereas Gunnar Stockton very easily could be described as a quarterback that is a huge threat as a runner. And there's a difference there. Brock Vandergriff's profile probably is more similar to Carson's, and Gunner is the one who separated himself a little bit in style. So, if you're looking for someone who might be able to come in and be used as a different type of a weapon to attack a defense, that probably bodes well for Gunner getting that call to saying, hey, maybe we can get a couple series to keep the defense on its heels or mix things up or, create a package of plays that we like for a more run-first quarterback. But in this scenario that, God forbid, your number one gets hurt, and in this scenario Carson is unavailable, who do we trust most? Who has earned the opportunity for the meat and potatoes of the position? And you care less, if you will, about the difference of one versus two in play style because one isn't available. Now you're looking for who do we think can get the job done on a play-in, play-out basis. And I think those are two different conversations. And you're allowing yourself to have two different answers. So, if Carson and probably lends itself early on to Gunner having more opportunity, but if it's not Carson, then it becomes a bigger question and probably does provide more space for Vandegrift.
Let's also, I guess, address the other thing that some fans will bring up. I've seen some of this on social media since the Beck news came out of, well, oh gosh, what about the possibility now of one of these quarterbacks leaving? And John, I don't want to be naive about this. First of all, the transfer portal's not open until December, so I don't think anyone's leaving now. But from a just a straightforward standpoint, I don't want to be naive that if one of these quarterbacks proves to be kind of the odd man out, between the Stockton Vandegrift battle, the so-called loser of that now extended competition, there is a pretty good chance that guy might consider going somewhere else. I would say, candidly, that's probably more true for Vandegrift than Stockton because he's also a year older. And, I'm sure he probably feels his clock ticking kind of the same way that maybe Beck felt like his clock was ticking, a while in the past. And not everyone's going to make the same decision that Carson Beck's made. I'm not, trying to push anybody out the door. I'm just saying that is a very real possibility in the world in which we live. But, John, I'm also a big believer if you're Georgia, I don't think you can worry about that at all. Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo's job is to get their quarterback ready for right now. And while I'm more than happy to talk about who might be the 2024 starting quarterback, the truth is that's not this Georgia coaching staff's job right now. We are not in an extended spring practice session of getting ready for the 2024 season. We, meaning Georgia, are getting ready for the 2023 season right now. And whoever may not be here in the future, I just simply don't think you can make any decision like that with that kind of thing in mind. You got to choose your best guy. They believe it's Beck. The transfer portal is a real option. One of these guys might consider it. And if you're a Georgia coach, John, I simply don't think you can worry about that.
No, that's a concern 14 games from now, right? And you are trying to create the best roster for right now. I mean, obviously you have to have awareness for 24 and 25, and that's the job of a coach to be able to zoom in and zoom out and prepare for tomorrow. And I don't think anyone could argue that Georgia hasn't done that already. They're trying to keep the best players on the roster, and a lot of that is retention, but it's also recruitment. And the opportunity that exists for Carson today is because of retention and the ability that our coaching staff has of presenting to a player, even though your opportunity is not today, it's worthwhile for you to stick around. And if that isn't a statement they can make with sincerity, then you can understand when a player, whether it's a quarterback or someone else, says, Coach, I think I want to see what else is out there, see if there's a better opportunity for me. And that's an understandable situation, but certainly not something that factors into every decision that you make in August. Right now you've got these three quarterbacks for at least this season, and you want to make the best decisions that put you in a place to find this team success, and then you'll have to address those kind of concerns, very legitimate concerns, when the time comes. But again, right now the decisions are all centered on what do we need to do to be champions by the end of this season. And I think that's the overarching goal that is driving all the decisions that are made.
It's our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with John Stinchcomb here on DawgNation Daily today. And don't forget, while you can't be a DawgNation Insider, you can be a Marlowe's Tavern Insider. John's got the DawgNation Insider part covered, but your chance to be a Marlowe's Tavern Insider is potentially just as much fun and just as lucrative for you, because you get great incentives just for signing up and terrific benefits throughout the future years when you enjoy your Marlowe's Tavern Insider Club status. Let me tell you how it works here. You can sign up just by going to marlowstavern.com, and you can use the Marlowe's app to register there as well if you want to. And when you do so, you're going to get $10 off a $30 order at Marlowe's Tavern just for doing that. Then after that, you're in the Insiders Club. And when you go to Marlowe's and spend at least $15 on food or beverage, that kind of earns you what's called a qualified visit. Now, once you complete 4 qualified visits, you're going to get a complimentary entree reward up to $20 on your next visit. So it's a really great way to enjoy the chef-inspired food, the craft cocktails, and also get great benefits every time that you do that. You can also get a special offer on your birthday, too. Some really, really cool stuff from our friends at Marlowe's Tavern. Great time to be a part of the Marlowe's Tavern Insider Club. Go to marlowstavern.com for more details on that. So, John, kind of an overarching question to finish things off here today. We also get information. We don't have time to cover a ton of this on today's show. We're going to do this throughout the week. Information on the open cornerback competition, left tackle situation, which we believe is probably Ernest Green. That's been kind of, at least for the moment, kind of thrown into flux a little bit because it sounds like Green's dealing with a little bit of an ankle injury. The running back thing seems like that's still kind of, I don't quite know what's going on there. What else from a position battle standpoint is interesting for you at Georgia right now?
Yeah, and I do think that there's a difference. I think there's a difference in the answers that you get from Coach Smart and the difference in what you deploy on a Saturday and versus a cornerback versus a quarterback or tackle even. Specifically for cornerbacks, those are guys that you can rotate, and Georgia has rotated in years past. So not naming who the clear ones and twos are in those positions isn't as necessary. I fully expect all the guys that are listed that he continues, the names that he continues to say are vying for that position, they're all going to play. And it's not something that probably, we'll have an idea of who's going to be the first people out in for the defense in the first series, but it won't be until, my guess is week 4 or 5, until it's very clear who's getting the lion's share of those reps, specifically at the cornerback position. The way the game is played now, there's more defensive backs on the field than ever, just because of the way offenses spread you out and deploy their wide receivers. So the expectation is we've got to get all these guys ready because they're gonna have significant time. A little bit different in the tackle spot. I think injury is one of the reasons why there's still a battle there. And in today's game, you need 7 players that are ready. Tackles and an interior player that's ready to step in. I think that was the conversation that we actually had here last week.
That's right.
What if we get down to number 8? But having a guy like Blasky, who is, in my mind, starter quality, somebody that you would not expect any significant drop-off if they're in the game, whether it's a tackle or a guard, is almost it's a necessity at this point. And when you're vying for national championships, again, I'll reference back to that Cincinnati game that Georgia is playing, and we're down, and Cincinnati loses their left tackle, and what a game changer that was for them. Georgia's not in a position where that can happen, and you still have your goals in front of you, and they remain realistic. I think the expectation is one goes down, next man up. And with the situation that Georgia has, specifically on their offensive line, I think you're able to say with some candor that can happen if Ernest Green's ankle were to linger, or another player, another starter that was not able to play in a given week, that we feel confident we've got 7 guys that are all ready and able to play under the biggest lights in the biggest conditions. And if you look back in history, and that's certainly been the case. That's how Broderick Jones kind of cut his teeth, is those opportunities, and the flexibility that Jamari Salyer offered allowed Georgia to not skip a beat when injury occurred or performance was lacking. They could make those kind of transitions, and it felt fairly seamless to the average fan, that there wasn't a drop-off, or you didn't have to change schemes to accommodate a lesser player. And I think Georgia finds itself in a very similar situation this year, that between the 6 or 7 guys that are available, they feel pretty confident that they don't have to compensate for a drop in performance.
John, thank you so much for being here for our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. We appreciate your insight on these dogs. We always enjoy getting that from you. Hope you have a great week, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon right here on DawgNation Daily as well.
Always a good time, BA. Go Dogs.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, really interesting stuff from John Stinchcomb there. And I told you before we were done, we want to do more on the quarterbacks. We're going to get there in a moment. Also, some news around the SEC we got to get to for you as well. And a lot of that actually relates to quarterbacks, too. And you're going to see a very interesting contrast in what Kirby Smart did on Saturday and what some of the other top SEC and national powers are apparently doing with their quarterback position. That's going to be interesting. We'll do this here. And we'll do it as a part of cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I got to tell you, everywhere I go, it's amazing that everybody always brings up the DawgNation cruise. I guess at this point in time, I've talked about taking cruises so much with our friends at Royal Caribbean, and that's sort of one of the things I guess I'm known for, which I am very thankful to be known for that. But people are like, BA, I'm going to be on that cruise, or BA, I want to be on that cruise, or BA, I hope to be on that cruise. Well, listen, the time is now to take advantage of this. If you go to the website, royaldogs.com, now I got to understand something. The DawgNation cruise, hundreds of people join us on board. We need a great travel agent to help us organize all this, because goodness knows I wouldn't be able to do this. They wouldn't trust me with that at all. So we've got a great travel agent named Jessica Slater, and Jessica has put a great website together to give you information on the DawgNation cruise. And while we're going to take hundreds of folks, it's not like we can take the whole ship over, because they're already selling staterooms to other folks there too. So we've got a couple of hundred staterooms reserved just for us here on the DawgNation side of things, and they are filling up fast. So it is not too soon to start thinking about April 22nd through the 26th on board Allure of the Seas. Bigger and better than ever is this year's DawgNation cruise, because we are on an Oasis-class ship, enjoying all the things there, and more specially themed DawgNation events too. So please, go to royaldogs.com, get signed up to be a part of the 3rd DawgNation cruise taking place April of 2024, going to Perfect Day, Coco Cay, and a whole bunch of fun there in the Bahamas with our friends on board Allure of the Seas. Can't wait for that. All right, before we get back to Georgia quarterbacks, let's talk some other quarterbacks here for a moment. And I have to tell you, if you are, now we're going to do this is called concern trolling, when you pretend to be concerned on someone else's behalf, but you're kind of doing it as a way of sort of twisting the knife. We're going to be concerned. We're going to do some concern trolling about Alabama here for a moment. Their quarterback situation right now is getting a little bit messy, and it's so unsettled between, Jalen Milroe, who we saw a year ago, Ty Simpson, who just is not going to happen apparently, and Tyler Buckner, the number 3 quarterback from Notre Dame, which, surprise, surprise, is going to be no better than apparently number 3, possibly Alabama there as well. Here's how bad things have gotten. All of a sudden, you're hearing more about Dylan Lonergan in this competition. Now, listen, understand something. I like Lonergan a lot. I saw him play at Brookwood. I have a little bit of a kind of a bias in favor of these state of Georgia prospects. So while I would never want Alabama to be successful, I root for Lonergan as much as one possibly could. This is not a denigration of Lonergan as a player. Here's what I'm telling you. Have you ever heard the old saying, if you've got 2 quarterbacks, you don't have 1 quarterback? What happens if you got 4 quarterbacks. See, what Alabama's had is a competition going on with 3 quarterbacks. And instead of whittling that down towards a starter, Kirby Smart was able to name one on Saturday. You got whisper campaign coming out of Tuscaloosa. I tell you who looks pretty good. That's Dylan Lonergan. That's sort of like the thing when you're at a restaurant and you're trying to find out what to order. You're like, maybe I'll just get a burger, right? It's like I'm trying to decide between this or that or that, or maybe I'll just get a burger. Like when you bring a 4th option into consideration, that tells me the quarterback competition at Alabama is going the wrong way. And Milroe, who has played, Ty Simpson, who's been there, former elite recruit, Tyler Buckner, who transferred because he knows the Tommy Rees offense. Apparently those guys are so unspectacular. Well, maybe this guy who came here to play baseball but also plays football too, maybe he can be the guy. Like that's a no shot at Lonergan, who I like, but this is a troubling sign if you're an Alabama fan that your quarterback competition is getting more. It's not getting less. You're not whittling down to a starter. You're kind of adding more contenders. That is not the direction you want to be moving. And I'm telling you right now, there's a chance this is just real, right? I mean, a lot of the stuff we kind of talk about during the summer ends up being a little exaggerated, not just us, but just anybody who kind of talks about college football during the offseason. We have a tendency to kind of exaggerate some of these, possibilities. But the whole idea of could the Alabama dynasty be toppled because they don't have a quarterback? Yes is an acceptable answer. Yes is at least a possible answer, and I would watch this in Tuscaloosa right now. You better believe I would. Speaking of quarterbacks, there's also some interesting stuff happening in Columbus, Ohio, where there's the possibility at least, now I don't know if this is real or not, but there's apparently a little bit of a possibility that we could have a surprise result in the Ohio State quarterback competition. For a long time, it's been sort of assumed that Kyle McCord was going to win that. McCord was number 8 quarterback going back to the 2019 class. He's been around for a while now. That's a good while ago now. Number 8 quarterback, 2019 class, been there waiting his turn. He's supposed to be the guy in that competition. At least I think most people kind of project him to win. I'm sure he's probably got posted Heisman on somewhere. But apparently Devin Brown, much younger player, number 5 overall quarterback in the class of 2022, it sounds like Brown has kind of done okay. And I said this about the Georgia cornerback situation a little earlier. The longer it goes, the more the younger guy has a shot at it. The quarterback thing at Ohio State might kind of be the same way. The more that goes on without McCord winning it, the more you must be left to conclude, well, maybe he just ain't going to win it. Maybe Devin Brown really does kind of have a very real shot there. I said this on, I guess it was Friday's show when Auburn and Hugh Freeze named Peyton Thorne as their starting quarterback. There is value in naming a starter. If you've got a guy who's going to be your starter, there is value in naming him. There used to be this conventional wisdom in college football a few years ago, and coaches, frankly, like Kirby Smart, probably contributed to this. Hey, you hold it out as a competition. You reveal nothing. That's what people kind of thought. That you make it seem like it's a cage match, death battle to see who the quarterback's going to be. And if it's really, really close, then there's probably some benefit in doing that. But the players are seeing what's happening in practice. If they're seeing one guy clearly be more ready and more equipped than the others, then there is some value in a coach kind of acknowledging that. There's also a value in a coaching staff saying, hey, at a certain point in time, the competition has to end and the preparation has to begin, and that's what Georgia says it's ready to do with Carson Beck. Alabama, they are not ready to do that, and they may not be ready for a while. And by the way, it doesn't have to have a positive resolution. It may just be a messy situation all year long. At Ohio State, it is also an extended quarterback battle. And once again, this doesn't have to be some sort of contrivance of, well, we're going to keep doing this as a way of keeping these guys from fighting and keeping this one guy from transferring. It could be just as simple as, honestly, this younger guy may actually overtake the other one. Watch that in Columbus there, too. That could be a surprise. Ultimately, it probably doesn't change the results of the season. I mean, listen, I don't like the Buckeyes. Ryan Day's, he's dumb, but he's not stupid. I mean, he's going to have a pretty good offense and a pretty good quarterback, whether it's Brown or McCord. You probably sort of know that's the case. One more note on quarterback here for a moment, and I got to plead ignorance on this. Some of you would probably say I'm ignorant plenty. I should probably plead it more, but in this particular case, I have to plead genuine ignorance about something. Eli Drinkwitz has come out to say that his quarterback competition is going to go into the season, and it's going to be the guy we saw play last year, Brady Cook, who most Missouri fans just don't like very much, and Sam Horn, another former Georgian. Horn was the historic Collins Hill offense, the quarterback a couple of years ago, back when they had Travis Hunter at wide receiver. Horn had a terrific year. He's also a really good baseball player, too. And it sounds like he's making a real push to possibly be the starting quarterback at Missouri. And so what Drinkwitz told us at the end of last week is that Horn and Cook, the guy who started, and it's frankly been pretty unspectacular, and that's probably putting it nicely, Cook and Horn are going to take their competition into the season, and they are both going to play in at least the first game. Now, here's what I can't find anything about. And if you know the answer, I honestly want to know this because we're several hundred miles from Columbia, Missouri, so sometimes news travels slow even in the internet age. What happened to Jake Garcia? Garcia was a pretty big prospect, was at Miami, transferred to Missouri. I'm not hearing one word coming out of Missouri about him, and maybe just not very good, or maybe it doesn't seem like he's hurt because there's nothing on the internet about him being hurt. But in the conversation about what's happening at quarterback, you hear about Cook, you hear about Horn, and I like Horn, so, I mean, I'd be happy for him if he got the job. But Garcia's got some real talent. That's the guy that was controversial in the state of Georgia a couple of years ago. You'll remember that because he was at Valdosta, ended up at Grayson. But he's a talented player. He transferred to Missouri, and you're not hearing anything about him here right now. So if you know about that, I'd honestly be curious to hear because I have to say that I don't know about that. It seems like it's Cook versus Horn there. And then one more thing, non-quarterback related. Florida suffered a pretty serious injury on Saturday, at least serious for the player who got hurt. Cam Carroll is his name. He is a transfer running back from Tulane. Only expected to be probably third string running back at Florida. And this is actually one of those areas in which Florida was like kind of quietly pretty good a year ago. Gators were more bound across the board, but they were okay with the rushing attack. They were like fifth in the SEC, about 200 yards per game. Trevor Etienne, Montrell Johnson, the transfer from Louisiana Lafayette. Those were, the kind of lead backs for Florida a year ago. They're both back this year. They're expected to be pretty good tandem. Now, Florida's going to be awful along the offensive line. That probably hurts the running numbers you would imagine. But as far as tandems of running backs go, Florida not bad. I guess Carroll was going to likely be the third string running back there, but he suffered what sounds like a really serious injury. So we send him prayers in his recovery for that. It sounds like his football career may be over. He was already a sixth-year player, and now you have, this what sounds like a very serious injury. So unfortunately for him, his career may be over. And you look at this from a Florida standpoint in the field. I guess now Trayon Webb, who you'll remember as a recruit from a couple of years ago, maybe now that makes him the number 3 running back here. So one of the areas in which Florida was actually sneaky strong last year, running the ball, that takes a little bit of a hit because of the injury to Cam Carroll, the transfer from Tulane, but maybe an opportunity for Trayon Webb there. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Before we get back to quarterbacks very quickly, let me also give a shout-out to my friends at Dr. Pepper and their brand-new beverage, Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream. I love Dr. Pepper. Got my eye on Dr. Pepper as soon as this show is done. And when you're reaching for Dr. Pepper right now, I want you to consider reaching for the brand-new permanent flavor offering from Dr. Pepper. It's Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream and Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream, 0 sugar. Now, wherever you're doing your shopping, you're going to Kroger, you're going wherever else, you're going to see right there on the shelf, and the can looks amazing, by the way, Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream, Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream, 0 sugar. So I hope you'll grab it. I hope you'll try it. And I hope you'll put that in the rotation with the rest of the great offerings from Dr. Pepper and all their, 0 sugar offerings there as well. I don't believe there's anybody who does the 0 sugar offerings better than Dr. Pepper because it always just tastes so good. I'm a big fan of that. And I know you're going to be a big fan of Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream and Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream, 0 sugar as well. So make sure you check some out today. All right, quarterback here just for a moment. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of talk about the Stockton-Vandegrift ongoing competition and kind of how that's going to impact what's going to happen in 2024 when Dylan Raiola arrives. And, of course, Raiola on Friday made his official debut as a Georgia quarterback when he played his first regular season game with the Buford Wolves. They got a huge win against St. Francis. There was a terrible fight at the end of the game. Jeff Santel had some of that on Twitter. You can go and see that if you want to. Pretty wild scenario there at the end. Apparently St. Francis is to blame based on what I've been told from people who were there. But nonetheless, big fight. Buford gets a big win. But Raiola, as you would imagine he would, was really very impressive. I'm led to believe in his debut. I was working that night, didn't get a chance to see it live, seen some of the highlights. I'll show you this quote here. Edderick Houston, 5-star defensive lineman. He's getting ready to make his college decision. Wish it was Georgia, but it's not going to be. But nonetheless, Houston had some very nice things to say to Jeff Sintel, DawgNation.com, about Dylan Raiola, saying that Dylan is amazing. He says, first of all, let's talk about off the field. He's a great guy, very well-rounded, supports his teammates no matter what. He's hyped in the weight room, just trying to get us up and then get on the field. It speaks for itself. He's also got great accuracy, got a nice arm, can get out of traffic and throw on the run. He's an amazing player all the way around. That's a lot of compliments go in the direction of Dylan Raiola, the soon-to-be Georgia quarterback, from Edderick Houston, a 5-star teammate of his there at Buford. So when you think about, okay, well, Raiola's about to be here, is Raiola going to be the quarterback at Georgia next season? Does he step in as a freshman and become that guy? Based on the compliments that Edderick Houston's throwing around to him, you would certainly believe that's a possibility. But here's where I have to admit that I think you might want to be careful assuming too much too soon as it relates to Raiola. Now, perhaps his talent just wins out, and because of the things that Houston said, maybe he just overwhelms everyone in a competition next year. This is also for the moment assuming that Carson Beck doesn't come back because that obviously complicates this a little bit more. But let's just have a conversation without a whole lot of parameters, right? Let's not put a bunch of labels on stuff. Raiola's coming here, and what happens to the quarterbacks who are already here? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. If we assume for a moment that Vandegrift and Gunnar Stockton, who did not win the Georgia starting quarterback job to begin this season, if we assume they're here and continuing to compete, I would say either guy might have a chance of winning that competition in 2024, even with Dylan Raiola here. And part of the reason I believe that, even though we just heard a bunch of great things about how talented Raiola is because apparently it sounds like both in terms of the whisper campaigns that are out there and Kirby Smart's own confirmation, both Brock Vandegrift and Gunnar Stockton have had very good fall camps, very good off seasons in their own right. So consider all of that in the context of Raiola's soon-to-be arrival there at UGA. In fact, in the midst of kind of announcing Beck as the starter on Saturday, Kirby Smart made it very clear he has liked a lot about both Vandegrift and Stockton here this year. This is Kirby from Saturday.
I'll be honest with you, I was really impressed with the other two quarterbacks throughout camp, how far they've come in terms of improvement. Coach Bobo has done a great job with those guys, and they both made a lot of plays with their feet and done some good things.
So when Kirby Smart says that, when he says, I've been impressed, they're getting, in Brock Vandegrift's case, and really Stockton's too, but they're getting multi-year head starts on Dylan Raiola. And Kirby's already impressed with him at a different point in time. Kirby said on Saturday that he would feel comfortable playing them along with Carson Beck if he had to. Y'all, that was the weapon that Carson Beck had at his disposal. It was the experience. And now Vandegrift and Stockton got some of that. In Brock's case, the last couple of years. Gunnar got that a year ago. Now they're getting more of that here in 2023 there too. This will also, for both Vandegrift and Stockton, be a weapon they can use in a competition that it's going to include Dylan Raiola next year. I think that's important to keep in mind, that Raiola may be truly the next big thing. But look at Arch Manning. He may be the next big thing for Texas. Arch Manning didn't come close to winning that Texas quarterback competition here this year. Part of that's because Quinn Ewers is a very talented quarterback in his own right, and part of that's because experience matters. Ewers had it, and Arch Manning didn't, and Manning may be the number 3 quarterback at Texas here this year. Maybe Dylan Raiola is different. Maybe Dylan Raiola is a better player, but you at least have to consider that as a possibility, that either Vandegrift or Stockton could be in a position where they could win a competition that includes Dylan Raiola next year. Keep that in mind, but also keep this in mind. We talked to John Stinchcomb about this a moment ago, that the competition isn't over. The competition now continues with Stockton and Vandegrift battling to see who can be the number 2 quarterback. And Kirby Smart talked about this, and you shouldn't miss this. This was kind of dropped in and everything else, but there is now an evaluation of what happens between Stockton and Vandegrift and who can kind of put himself to be the spot where Carson Beck was last year, being the number 2 quarterback, getting the number 2 reps, and getting that opportunity to kind of enter a game when the starting quarterback comes off the field. this is something to keep in mind here, too. More from Kirby on the battle that's going to be ongoing now between Stockton and Vandegrift. Take a listen to Kirby again.
As far as the other guys, I'm excited to see those guys hopefully have an opportunity to play, compete. They'll be able to go with the ones here in the next 2 weeks, some, and get more reps and figure out, if we have a two, who that's going to be and how it's going to go forward.
So it's interesting to hear that there. Kirby Smart says, we're going to figure out if we have a two. In other words, is there a clear leader between Vandegrift and Stockton? And if there is, that person gets treated as a number 2 quarterback. So it was sort of thought to be, well, Vandegrift was second in line while battling Carson Beck, and for all intents and purposes, that appears to be true. But that doesn't give him that status necessarily above Gunnar Stockton. I'm led to believe that Stockton can get some number 2 reps during practice. He's going to get a chance to show that he ought to be potentially the number 2 quarterback. That Vandegrift is going to have to beat out Stockton in order to be the number 2 quarterback on this roster, and being number 2, as we said before, that really matters. That's what we're led to believe the next few weeks might look like at Georgia practice, just based on kind of your, I guess, reading of the situation, but also some of the whispers that kind of come out on something like that. And with that in mind, Kirby gave a pretty clear challenge to both Vandegrift and Stockton. He doesn't mention Dylan Raiola by name, but in the context of the fact that Raiola is going to be here, you know, the idea that what you do now could matter for you in the future, but it also could matter for you in terms of getting on the field here this year there as well. So the challenge from Kirby to both Vandegrift and Stockton could not be more clear about what he wants to see from them the rest of the way. One more time, let's hear from Kirby Smart.
The decision about the quarterback is really about who the starter is. We haven't talked even beyond that. I mean, that's not the conversation. We've got 2 really talented young quarterbacks who are coming along and getting better. And we want to keep that growth going. The only way you keep that growth going is you continue to get those guys really quality reps. That's one of the greatest separators in every program in the country, is who's able to get quality reps for their 2s and 3s from this point forward. Because if you don't get quality reps, you can regress. I want those 2 guys to keep growing and keep competing.
So to be clear here, it won't just be Vandegrift who gets those quality reps. It's going to be Gunnar Stockton getting those reps too. And who makes the most of the opportunity they get with those reps, that may determine who this year's number 2 quarterback is, and perhaps in the future, next year's number 1. So to wrap things up today, fun golden shoe. And admittedly, most every golden shoe that we share on this show, we share via Twitter. I guess it's called X now, but that's kind of how most people send these in to me. But today we got one from a guy named Mike Gagne via email. And I want to read this to you. I want you to see the photo for those of you watching on video. He says, I was not sure how to submit a picture for consideration for a golden shoe recognition, so I'm attaching it in an email. I'm a high school teacher and coach and longtime dog fan, currently in Walhalla, South Carolina, which is right there above Georgia-South Carolina border. He's also right in the heart of Clemson country, he says. Well, the picture attached is on the board in front of my classroom. I feel obligated to represent while in enemy territory. One thing you may not be able to see in the picture in the top left corner, I've posted 43, 18, and 4, which has stayed up year-round. That's Georgia's all-time record against Clemson, which a lot of his students, I'm sure, probably don't like to see. But nonetheless, he's spreading the good word up there. Also, thanks for all you do and the others that promote the dogs. That's an incredibly nice thing, Mike. I appreciate that. And you see an unbelievable picture there. Wouldn't you love to have a high school teacher who had that being shown off every day? You love to see that. National championship flags, everything else. No doubt very deserving of a golden shoe. Really appreciate that. Well earned indeed. How about lousy stinking Gators in Jacksonville? 68 days from right now. Georgia back, beating up on Florida again. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. So let's evaluate here for a moment. Admittedly, a long show. However, we also did like 3 pretty meaty topics. Had a nice interview with John Stinchcomb. Gave you updates on 3 different quarterback situations across the SEC and the rest of college football. Gave you some bad news for Gators fans about a running back injury. We cover a lot of ground. So long show, but action-packed. So hopefully well worth your time. Let us dive in here now and get some comments. We'll try to do a full comment section. I know Friday we cut that pretty short there because of the high school football action. Let's see what's happening in here. Daryl Fleming asking about Smoke Bowie. I saw where On3 reported that Bowie is, I guess, back in the transfer portal, which I don't know. I guess if Georgia dismissed him, like, what I was trying to figure out is like the reporting I saw from On3 was interesting in two respects. First of all, they're like, he's in the transfer portal, but the transfer portal doesn't open until December. The other thing that On3 reported is that Georgia dismissed Bowie. That's what they said. That was like their language. That could have been just maybe a slightly improper word choice, because what Kirby Smart at one point said was it was kind of a mutual parting of the ways. Either way, it's basically true that Georgia kind of dismissed Bowie, and maybe that dismissal made it possible for him to enter the portal because Georgia was more than happy to let him go. Maybe you can be in the portal if you're not on someone else's active roster. You just can't leave an active roster to go to the transfer portal. Maybe that's what that is. But Bowie is now in the transfer portal, according to On3. And the one guy they have, has always been pretty good on the portal stuff. Let us see what else. Let's see what else. David Wayne Carroll says if Gunner beats out Brock for number 2, then what? I mean, I just think that, look, what I've been told was that Vandegrift had a good summer and is in the midst of having a good summer and a good fall camp. So I think he's making a good showing for himself. But I'm telling you right now, I've also heard good things about Gunner Stockton there as well. And, in some cases it's, sort of different people have different factions. There's probably kind of part of that. For the most part, we stay pretty nonpartisan about most of this stuff. You'll notice we don't really have a lot of – I mean, honestly, there's nothing to me more distasteful than when someone tries to, make a quarterback controversy every single dadgum year. It's like it doesn't always have to be that way. So for the most part, we stay pretty nonpartisan about a lot of stuff like that. But I have heard that Vandegrift has done pretty well. And I have heard that Stockton has done pretty well. And obviously, Beck, the one they feel the most confident about right now. Let's see what else is going on. I'm trying to figure out what Facebook is talking about, and I can't figure it out. I can't quite figure out what it is that they're talking about. Carl Stevenson on the fight at the Buford game. Yeah, I saw the video of that. Pretty disappointing. Honestly, this was not a great week for high school stuff. Obviously, you had the Buford-St. Francis fight. My understanding is from people who were there that might have been more of a St. Francis thing than a Buford thing. You also had the weird thing at the Benedictine game the other night. That was strange. I mean, I forget who Benedictine was playing, but they're just the team. I'm not blaming it on them. I'm just saying it was a game involving Benedictine. They're just the one team that I remember. I don't remember who Benedictine was playing. You hate to see it, man, because high school football is the best we got. I mean, there is nothing more like American, just salt of the earth, real communities. I mean, high school football is it. I mean, a lot of us just sort of bleed high school football because of just kind of that's just the best we've got in our communities. And when you see some of that, bad stuff kind of creeping into that, it's heartbreaking. Todd Greer said, yeah, St. Francis started it. So there you go. Barry Watkins, yeah, I did recognize some jersey numbers in the middle of all that. I did recognize some of that. Miriam Corbin says, let's let the quarterback controversy stay in Bama. Yeah. And I don't quite know that it's controversial. And I know what Miriam's saying. I think the Bama thing is just messy. It's just messy. And, when it's messy like that, sometimes that stuff has a tendency to kind of, it doesn't have to resolve itself. It doesn't. It can just stay messy. Let's see what else over here on Facebook. H. Murphy says, because I don't know what these guys who leave are going through, that they transfer to a less accomplished team even when you're getting a decent amount of playing time. Yeah, I mean, I think in Bear's case, I think he's kind of sad, right? He just wanted more snaps. That Georgia's just going to rotate a defensive line. And Alexander is, if he had stayed, sight unseen, I'm not going to make too much of an evaluation of Jordan Hall, but of the guys who are here, Alexander probably has the most raw NFL potential of any of the other Georgia defensive linemen. That's probably true. I'm talking about defensive tackles, not Mikael Williams. Mikael's sort of a different beast. But of the defensive tackles, Bear would have probably had the most raw NFL potential. But that doesn't mean that, Georgia doesn't value the depth and value the experience that guys like Zion Logue and Warren Brinson and certainly Nazir Stackhouse have had. Those guys are going to be on the field. And this notion that somehow Alexander deserved to kind of supplant not just Jalen Carter, but all the other guys in terms of their ability to rotate and have their own moments too, that's not going to be the case. That's just not going to happen. Joseph Kennedy talking about the future of Smoke Bowie, comparing him to Tate Martell. Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't know, man. I don't know. And here's one of those things where I know this sounds corny, and I probably am a corny person. I just probably am. But I genuinely, sincerely, what I probably am is overly earnest sometimes. Cool people are not earnest. I've never been very cool. Cool people are ironic. Uncool people are kind of earnest, and I'm probably more earnest than a cool person would be. Cool people are typically more ironic. But I do earnestly believe that football can be a very powerful tool to make men. I think football shapes future men. I think it's really valuable because of that. I really believe that football would not be as popular as it is if, in our subconscious, we didn't believe that football was a really important thing for society. We need good, strong men. Football builds good, strong men, especially when it's used appropriately. And if it didn't have this kind of extra societal value, it probably wouldn't be as popular as it is. So when someone like Smoke Bowie doesn't work at Georgia after also not really working at Texas A&M, I hate that. And honestly, for me, it goes beyond, well, this was a talented player that could have potentially helped Georgia secondary, or this is a recruit that, going to go to Texas A&M and maybe the Aggies win some games, whatever else. A lot of this kind of comes down to, I hate it for Bowie that football's not doing for him right now what it can do for a lot of young men. I hate that there's some sort of barrier that's preventing the sport from doing its good work on his behalf. And honestly, I really do hope he figures it out. Hope he eventually finds a way to benefit from that, as corny as that sounds. Jeremy Harbin brings up a good point. I didn't see all the highlights from this weekend. Stetson Bennett looks good, y'all. He looks like a very potentially capable rookie quarterback. Now, what I have seen, sometimes you get those, Stetson's a little bit of a roller coaster ride, which I think is also pretty fun and entertaining too. So it's not like it's not exactly all. What Stetson's like is the golfer who, it's like, you kind of bomb driver off the planet right, and then second shot, you put it, 30 feet from the cup for a chance at a birdie putt. It's one of those things where there's a little bit of a ride. You're kind of going on a little bit of a journey with Stetson when he's playing, but he's been good. And Sean McVay is a valuable head coach for a quarterback because he is a very quarterback-friendly coach. And the Rams, we love Matthew Stafford, but Stafford was a rookie in this league in 2009. That's a long time ago now. That in the right set of circumstances, it could really work out well for Stetson Bennett. Paul Moon says that Gunnar Stockton reminds him a tiny bit of Tim Tebow, but with more natural throwing motion. I could see that comparison. I felt like that there was some Tebow stuff to Gunnar's high school game, for sure I did. Now, what I think that Gunnar did in high school, because a lot of Gunnar stuff in high school was the Tebow style of running where I'm just going to go straight ahead, I'm going to lower my shoulder. And as someone who really loves Gunnar and believes that Gunnar can be a very good quarterback at the SEC level, please don't do that in SEC competition. Please don't do that thing where you just lower your shoulder and try to run over SEC linebackers, because I want to keep you healthy. I want to keep you out there. Let's go. Brandon asked, do you think that Schumann turned down the NFL job because he's waiting for that job at Alabama to open up? I think that Glenn Schumann is a college football guy. And, he talked about this the other day. I forget what the exact quote was, but when he did his press conference, there was something that he said that kind of jumped out at me, and I'm not going to say it right, but it was something along the lines of how much he's enjoying working at Georgia for Kirby Smart. And here's what we know, that not everybody enjoys that. I mean, we saw a defense backs coach last year for 5 minutes, took another job just shortly after getting here. Not every coach enjoys the experience of working with a coach like Kirby. You want to go back to the Nick Saban era. Kirby stuck around with Saban for a long time, and a lot of other coaches didn't. They just didn't really enjoy it. And when Glenn Schumann says, hey, I enjoy this, trained up in the Alabama program, working with Kirby Smart, I enjoy it. And at a time in which there are a lot of other coaches who are looking for their way out, we see all the assistant coaches taking jobs in the NFL, but there's also a movement the other way. The new coach at McEachern worked for Billy Napier at Florida a year ago. The coach at Carrollton, Joey King, was a college coach as recently as a couple of years ago. There are a lot of college coaches who are leaving because they don't enjoy it anymore. Lane Kiffin the other day was talking about how the joy is gone from college coaching, or whatever it was that he said. There's this thing where a lot of college coaches are having to confront how much do they enjoy the job that they're doing. And Glenn Schumann the other day, it just stuck out to me. He's like, I really enjoy this. Love it. Great to be part of it, whatever. And I was just kind of thinking, gosh, that really sounds like a guy who's made for college football. And Georgia's lucky to have these coaches who are made for college football and want to stick around. But, you say, well, what about the Alabama job? Would Glenn Schumann like to be head coach at Alabama? I'm assuming that he probably would. And when Nick Saban leaves, should Alabama hire Glenn Schumann? I think they should take a very long look at him. I do. And I hate the idea of Schumann being back at Alabama as head coach. That kind of stinks. I hate that idea. But, that's his alma mater. And it's also, one of the biggest jobs out there. And you say, what about being the guy that follows the guy? You don't want to necessarily do that. But it's still a chance to be Alabama head coach. And I just don't think you turn that down, I don't think. So, I guess direct answer to your question, yes, I believe that Glenn Schumann wants to be a college coach. That's what I believe to be true. Johnny Surf Dog says Beck throws 40-yard lasers into tight windows. He's going to be a weapon that we have not seen in many years. Woohoo, go Dogs. So Johnny's very high on Beck right now. Paul Moon, the subject of Jacob Eason. Here's what I'll tell you. As I had somebody who knows, like a very, like a person that really, really knows, tell me off the record on Jacob Eason when Eason was the hottest name in the world. Like when Eason was not quite yet at Georgia, when he was Gatorade Player of the Year, biggest deal in the world. I had somebody tell me off the record, and this is someone who and this is someone who does know stuff like this. He told me flat out that he didn't think Jacob Eason would ever be good because Eason, in his mind, wasn't accurate. And this former coach, told me that accurate in retrospect, what he said then has turned out to be window throw is about two things. It's about the willing scout. Tell me one time. I think it's really interesting because I'm always interested in the scouting process. Because to me, I don't really have a scout's eye. I don't pretend to. But the scouting process in all sports is really interesting to me. And what this scout said was, when it comes to evaluating pitchers, that the first thing that he would potentially professional pitcher faces a guy who will be a professional hitter. That big forearm. When a major leaguer, if you put him in a different situation, standing at the plate, there's something pretty imposing about that. And there are a lot of potential draft picks, potential pros, who, when they see a true professional level hitter, they just simply won't throw the ball over the plate. They'll nibble. They do not trust their stuff to put the ball over the plate. And you can eliminate so many potential prospects just from the standpoint of, does this guy even have the guts to throw it over the plate against a guy who can, hit it 500 feet? And a lot of pitchers eliminate themselves because they just simply won't. They could throw it over the plate, but they're not going to because they don't want to do this deal right here. And that eliminates so many would-be, pitchers. So in quarterbacking, I think the same thing is true to a certain extent. You're standing there, you see the opportunity. Do you have the guts to put it in there? And then at that point in time, do you have the accuracy to do it? I heard a different coach, and this was more in like a public setting. He said, there are some kids that can take a snowball. Now, it doesn't snow very much here, but same principle, applies. There are some kids who can take a snowball and hit a stop sign, and there are some kids who can't. And that's ultimately what it kind of comes down to. Now, I think for those of you who are like involved in youth sports, things like that, I think there are certain mechanic things that can be done to make youth kids throw more accurately. I think at the youth level, at the sort of Gatorade Player of the Year level, there are probably some simple mechanical fixes that can make kids more accurate. But when it gets to the sort of higher level, there is a certain innate accuracy that some have and some don't. And there are a lot of old school coaches that will say, I've never seen a player improve his accuracy. that if you are not accurate, then you are not ever going to be accurate. In the case of Jacob Eason, that probably turned out to be true. Let's see what else. Jeremy Harbin says, I believe that Beck is also way more accurate than Eason. Yeah, I believe so too. And frankly, I'm not trying to speak ill of the, no longer at Georgia. I almost said no longer with us, but that's a totally different thing. No longer at Georgia. But it's not that hard to be that much more accurate than Eason was, unfortunately. And I believe that Beck probably is. Nature Gator says that he's making fun of me. Looking forward to watching that horrible Florida offensive line, that horrible Florida quarterback, and that horrible Florida team. Yeah, let's see. I mean, hey, Nature, and you've been with us, so you know this. I told you a year ago. I will make my take on this I was on the record about this a year ago, and I'll be on the record about this right now. You probably know this because I think you were with us. I picked Florida to beat Utah a year ago. And what I said was, a team like that comes into Gainesville, the SEC team's supposed to win the game. Florida did. I have now, obviously, like a lot of other people said, Rice-Eccles Stadium in Salt Lake City is a completely different animal. I don't expect Florida to win that game. I don't. I really don't. And I don't care if Cam Rising doesn't play. And maybe you probably know more about the current status of Rising and the, possibly injured backup much more than I do, probably. I haven't been following it nearly as closely as I'm sure you probably have been. This is not a game that Florida's supposed to win. And if you're not careful, it's going to be as ugly as the Oregon State game was. Just being honest with you. But I'll also be honest here too. If Florida wins this game, I will not shortchange it. I will not take a cheap shot or anything like that. I told you a year ago, you don't get credit for beating a Pac-12 team when you're playing them in your stadium. Georgia didn't get credit for beating Oregon either. Not national media didn't give them credit for that. Georgia fans themselves didn't strut around about that. SEC teams and situations like that are supposed to beat Pac-12 teams. Georgia beat Oregon 49-3. Never thought about it again the moment the game was over with. Or, Florida beat Utah. That's what you're supposed to do. You're Florida playing at home. But in this situation, even if Rising is hurt, Florida's still more than a touchdown underdog. You go to Salt Lake City and you win, I'll give you some credit for it. I will. And I'll be more than happy to say, hey, you better consider the possibility that some close games that you expect Florida to have, even with Tennessee, if you beat Utah on the road, even Tennessee becomes more winnable. I think that's true. Certainly Kentucky becomes more winnable. South Carolina probably there as well. Maybe this year you might even beat Vanderbilt, which would certainly be an improvement over a year ago. If you beat Utah, I'm going to give you some credit, but you got to win the game first. Paul Moon says, don't lie, BA. You won't miss a chance to take a cheap shot at Florida. Hey, you never know. You never know. String Gene says Utah's going to be fired up. I'm telling you right now, that place is tough to play. Like, the state of Utah is a little bit, I'm not going to say it's more, like, we think about, college sports being non-existent, way out west, and for the most part it is. But, like, the Utah teams, they care about their teams. Like, BYU's got a ton of fans. Like, BYU's got real fan support. That's a team that gets real support. I've told you a million times. They've been totally disrespected by the Pac-12. There's no more poetic justice in the world from the idea that Utah is now forced to join BYU in the Big 12 after all the years in which Utah kind of turned its nose up at BYU. There is no more poetic justice than that. And the fact that BYU is in a position to thrive in the Big 12, or the Pac-12, is soon to cease to exist, at least possibly speaking. But BYU's got real fan support. And Utah, compared to a lot of other teams out there, they've kind of got some real support too. Like, they care about football in the Beehive State. Let's see what else. Christy talking about somebody being at the casino. Who's at the casino? Ducati 1098 says I take jabs at Florida on every show. Yeah. But even in the midst of that, like, we still try to be honest. And I mean, as much as I will, obviously take my jabs and do my things, I even kind of took one a second ago. You may have picked up on that. But as much as we do that kind of stuff, if Florida goes on the road and beats Utah, like I am not a propagandist. I will be more than happy to say, hey, that's a serious win. That's a very serious win. On the road at Utah would be a very serious win. Jay Shipes, okay, well, there you go. I know Jay is deserving of a good time right now because I know he's been through a lot here a little bit lately. So, Jay, have a good time. He's at Cherokee. Okay, good. That's awesome. That's really fun. Well, good. I hope that's a fun time for him. I hope he brings back a Georgia National Championship ticket. That's great. Let's see what else. I was about to say something else, but I'm not going to. Not about Jay. About something completely different. Let me go somewhere else. B-Max says the Cam Rising is limited right now. The backup, Brandon Rose, injured too. So if the game were to be played today, a walk is the third string. Is it really a walk on? But you got to understand something. Even with that, I mean, Vegas, the sports books, they know about the quarterback situation. Even with that, they still got Utah's more than a touchdown favorite. So, our Florida fan friend on the YouTube side seems to think I'm being too hard on him. But y'all, the sportsbook people, they are not in the habit of being wrong when money's involved. And even with considerable injuries to two Utah quarterbacks, they look at Florida and say, this bunch will be lucky to keep it within a touchdown. So, I mean, you got to at least consider the possibility of that. AJ Ferraro, a little inside info, saying, I got a chance to watch practice back before the spring game for a staff and faculty day. Carson's arm strength sets him apart from the other quarterbacks. He was throwing lasers during practice. That's an interesting thing to hear, AJ. Thanks for sharing that. And I think that kind of matches some of what maybe we've seen during warm-ups, things like that. Carson does throw it really well. And this is one of those things, sometimes the workout videos can be kind of hard to make sense of because they're tightly edited and kind of, shot from a certain angle, whatever else. But Carson's workout videos have always looked good. I mean, I said this on our high school football broadcast on Peachtree TV. I am not a scout, but here's the one thing I'm looking for from quarterbacks. How easily do they throw it? When you stand there, hopefully you have a little bit of a presence in the pocket, how much of a wind up do you have to get rid of it? Can you just stand there and flick it? And in Carson's case, he throws it easy. He throws an easy ball. AJ also gives you kind of interesting phrasing here that for Beck, the floor seems pretty high. I think that's probably pretty true. But I also think that there's something else that goes on here. Ultimately, Stetson Bennett became the guy at Georgia because those players believed in him. And Bennett's performance on the field alone wasn't the thing that kind of propelled him to the job or even propelled Georgia to the national championships. It was the belief they had in Bennett that I think really mattered. And y'all, once again, I hate to speak ill of a quarterback who's not here anymore. I think you're just forced to conclude they didn't believe in JT Daniels the same way. They just didn't. And maybe they should have. Maybe I'm misreading this. But there was a belief that seemed to exist for Georgia in Bennett that did not seem to exist for Daniels. Or if it did, there just wasn't a ton of proof about it. I don't know. You just sort of have to conclude that, don't you? So some of the stuff for Carson is, can you earn the belief that Stetson earned? Stetson's teammates liked him. They did. At least the overwhelming majority of them seem to. And so Beck, his overall performance, I love the way that AJ says that. He does have a pretty high floor, you think, right? I mean, his talent, skill set seems to be fairly easily translatable to what Georgia wants him to do. You certainly would assume. But you got to get these teammates to rally around you, and perhaps that's the reason why he's the name the starting quarterback, because perhaps they are. But that's the other part that Beck's going to have is you got to have that leadership thing. These guys have got to want to go to bat for you, and that's the I guess the next challenge for Carson here right now. Brandon Griffin says if Bama expects to make the college football playoff by playing bully ball and keeping the scores low, they are in for a long season. Yeah, I don't know that I, Brandon, necessarily agree with that to the extent that you do. I mean, I would agree that it is a major change for a team that has been as quarterback dependent as anybody to suddenly say, quarterback doesn't matter. We're going to play defense. We're going to run the ball. But I do think, as I said before, I love taking my shots, and I love the kind of trash talk back and forth, but I try not to lie. Like I try to be as honest as I'm genuinely capable of being. The number one weapon that Alabama has going for it right now is I do think their offensive line is really, really good. Obviously you think about Latham, but across the board, I think they've got Booker, of course. Like across the board, they've got, I believe, a really pretty strong offensive line in a way that like another national championship contender, Ohio State, probably doesn't. And for as much as I think the Georgia offensive line is better than mighty Michigan, the two-time Joe Moore Award winner, I think Alabama's offensive line is probably better too. And so I can't fully count Alabama out. I'm not even talking about the national championship. I'm talking about being a legitimate national championship contender. I can't fully count them out because I do believe they've got a good offensive line on paper. And, y'all, I think that Justice is going to be a problem, and I hate that. I don't hate it for him, but I hate it for us, right? I mean, I would like for Justice Haynes to have been at Georgia. I believe that Justice Haynes and Caleb Downs are both going to be problems, this year. And I think you get a really good offensive line, a running back the capabilities of Justice Haynes. It sounds like I think that can get you farther than what Brandon thinks there. Even if you get semi-competent quarterback play. Now, it's possible you don't even get competent quarterback play, and therefore that undoes the Alabama season. But good defense, I believe Alabama's got one. Really good offensive line, I believe Alabama's got one. Pretty capable running game, I believe Alabama's got a shot to have that. Like, I can't fully count them out yet because of that. I believe that LSU's probably better because I think LSU can kind of match them at certain spots. And I think LSU's probably underrated, but I'm not going to get too far out in front on totally dismissing Alabama because I do believe that if you got a good offensive line and a good defense, you got a chance in almost every game you play. Bill Russell says, which SEC team is the most overhyped? For my money, that's probably Tennessee. Not to say that Tennessee can't be good, but for my money, Tennessee is the most overhyped right now. Let's see what else. All right, we got to get ready to go. It's late. That's what we got to do. Good comments today. Try to do a little longer by you. Now it's getting late, so we got to pop out of here and get ready to go. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. They'll even get your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. You can find them online at rsandrews.com today. Hope you all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. More on kind of the build-up to the start of the season for Georgia. We'll do our First and 15 at DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app at 9:45. We'll roll across all video platforms there at 10 a.m. And then after the show for our R.S. Andrews cool down when it's all said and done. R.S. Andrews taking care of you. Water heater goes out. In many cases, R.S. Andrews can also replace it for you the same day. And very soon, the return of Go With The Flow presented by R.S. Andrews. Dari Pedro getting ready for all of that. That's going to be a good time.